you want to be like, get a dog. A dog will love you unconditionally. That confidence is often confused with competence. That if you act confidently, people will believe you're competent, even, by the way, when they have data to suggest that you're not. Unless you're Oprah, be yourself is terrible advice.
Today we have the legendary Jeffrey Pfeffer, Stanford professor and the author of many books, one of my favorite 7 Rules of Power. In this episode, Jeffrey reveals why confidence beats competence every time, how breaking the rules can lead to success, and why authenticity is overrated in leadership. And he would reveal a simple daily habit to project power and confidence. Get ready for bold truth, actionable advice, and unfiltered insights. What motivated you to distill power dynamics into these 7 rules, and why do you think they're so universally applicable?
So over the years, I've written a number of books on power, beginning with Power in Organizations in 1981, I think. And then I wrote Managing with Power. And then I wrote Power, Why Some People Have It and Others Don't. And as the world has gone on, I think 2 things have changed. Number one, I've learned more about power and how to teach it and convey it, because I teach it to my class and I've given lectures on it basically around the world. That's number one. And number 2, people are less prone to read. And so one of the things I wanted to do in 7 Rules of Power is to try to condense everything I knew about power into a shorter format. That's number 1. And number 2, when I began writing about power, I would write about, major figures in history and politics. People like Lyndon Johnson, people like Robert Moses, the New York Commissioner of Parks and many other public works, people like Robert McNamara, etc. And the problem with these are interesting people, but many of the many of the readers of this material are not going to, first of all, remember them because they're historical, and number 2, they're not going to be able to relate to them because they're exceptional cases, interesting historically, but not really relevant to most people's lives. So I wanted to write a book in which, for the most part, almost all of my examples are drawn from people just like the readers. They are students of mine. They are people who I've met along the way who are doing amazing things with power. But as you know, when I bring these guests to my class, one of the comments from some of the students is, these people aren't so exceptional. They're just like me. And I say, that's exactly the point. The point is, if they are just like you, you could be them. You could do what they are doing. And so I think those are the 2 reasons why I wrote 7 Rules of Power. I tried to condense it, make it more readable, and also to bring in examples that people could relate to. And by the way, one of the comments I get is that these examples are, in fact, quite diverse. I have men, I have women, I have African Americans, I have Pakistanis, I have a Saudi, I have all kinds of interesting people from around the world, which also helps, I think, people relate to the material because they can see themselves in the examples.
And you've written so many books about power. What was the defining moment in your life or career that made you realize the importance of understanding power?
So my doctoral dissertation was about interorganizational power, not so much personal power. But when I came to Stanford a long time ago, 1979, I was asked to put together an elective. And I had not really taught about power. I'd done some research on power, but mostly departmental power and interorganizational power, not so much individual power. But I looked at what was written about power at that time, and I looked at what was being taught, which was essentially nothing. And I said, as I've done it really throughout my career, I've identified important topics that nobody was talking about, and I thought this was an important topic that students really needed to understand and master. The same year I started teaching power at Stanford, John Cotter started teaching a similar class called Power and Influence at Harvard. And we were the first 2 classes, believe it or not, on power taught in the business school, even though power is obviously a fundamentally important topic. So I said, well, this looks like an interesting thing to do. I will begin doing it. And over the years, of course, the course has evolved enormously and it's gotten much more effective and better. So that's why I did it. My whole career is based on finding interesting topics and an interesting angle on those topics that nobody else is doing.
I mean, before we jump into those 7 rules of power, you mentioned that people often react with denial, anger, sometimes sadness when confronted with the realities of power. Why do you think this happens?
Well, I think people are raised by their parents to be nice. Most religions talk about how people should be. And the leadership literature, I wrote a book called Leadership BS. And BS, by the way, does not stand for Bachelor of Science.
That's one of my favorite books, by the way. It's a really good book.
I think the leadership literature and the leadership training is extraordinarily aspirational. And so we talk about a world that really doesn't exist. We might want it to exist, but it doesn't exist. And so people come to my class really not psychologically prepared to deal with the world as it is. You can see, my favorite example at the moment is the election of Donald Trump. I have people, who are literally on the night of his re-election in 2024, people were crying, people are upset. People are saying, how can this possibly happen? If you read 7 Rules of Power, you'll understand exactly how it can happen, since he follows all the 7 Rules of Power. So, I think but people often live in an imaginary world, or in a world that they want. We deny the reality that all of us will die. A friend of mine who's a Buddhist would give seminars in which he would say, how many of you are going to die? And it would take a while till all the hands went up. So I think we are prone to live in a world of denial in a variety of different ways. And the denial of the realities of power is just one more example.
Let's start with the rule number 1, get out of your own way. What are the most common ways people sabotage their own chances of getting power?
So rule number 1 is rule number 1 for a reason, because if you don't get out of your own way, nobody else is going to help you. People sabotage themselves. I think it's quite common for people to suffer from imposter syndrome. I think this is particularly true for women or underrepresented minorities or foreign nationals. They would say, I don't deserve this. I don't feel I'm qualified for this role or this job. So that I think they carry around images and visions of themselves that are inconsistent with them having power. The other night, I was at a dinner given by my wife for a Mexican-American young man who's running a nonprofit organization. And he sat at the table and he said, I was raised in a poor home by a single mother, and very disadvantaged growing up. And I said, yes. I said, those are some adjectives that I'm sure are true. But on the other hand, at the age of 32, you're running this very important nonprofit. You are extraordinarily skilled. You're very well read. I said, I don't want you to ever again talk about the fact that you were raised by a single mom in a poor home, because that isn't what defines you. What defines you is how you are now. So I think we carry around descriptions of ourselves that disempower us. I think another thing that disempowers us is that most of us worry too much about being liked. In the words of my dear friend Gary Loveman, who ran Harrah's and then called Caesars and then went on to be a very senior executive at Aetna, he has this wonderful saying, if you want to be like, get a dog. A dog will love you unconditionally. Your job as a senior leader is not necessarily to win a popularity contest. You are not hired to be popular. You're hired to get things done. You are hired to make things happen. You are hired to accomplish things. And I think we're trained from a very early age to try to become, to use a phrase, people pleasers. And, is Donald Trump a people pleaser? I don't think so. Is Elon Musk a people pleaser? I don't think so. Was Steve Jobs a people pleaser? I don't think so. I think most of the people who have a big impact on the world are concerned about pushing their agendas forward, not necessarily winning some kind of popularity contest. So I think these are the major ways in which we get in our own way.
We have one guy in our community. He's the first person in his family to ever go to college, and he graduated recently, and he got a job in Google. And he called me as a product manager, and he called me and he's panicking, and I don't know what to tell him. I think he's getting in his own way, but I don't know what advice I could give to him.
So I think what he needs to do is he needs to look around and see that he, in fact, may have come from a certain background, but Google didn't hire him because Google's in the business of hiring unqualified people as an act of charity. And so he needs to compare himself objectively to the people that he's associating with, and to see that he's at least as qualified as they are, if not more so, and to stop worrying about where he came from and worry more about where he's going.
Can you share a simple exercise someone can do to start projecting more confidence and power in their daily life?
Oh, sure. I mean, this goes to rule 3 or 4, which is to act and speak with power. I think people should watch Amy Cuddy's TED Talk called Presence, or people should watch my colleague Deb Grunfeld's talk, Acting with Power, both of which are available for free on YouTube. Or people should go and watch the YouTube presentation by Hermania Ibarra, Ibarra, who teaches at London Business School, used to teach at INSEAD, began at Harvard Business School. She also gives a talk relevant to this. And I think people need to practice, film themselves with their cell phones, stand in front of a mirror, get feedback from their friends and colleagues about how they can show up in a more powerful fashion, which is very important because we respond to people on the basis of how they look and sound, not necessarily on the basis of their actual competence.
Oh God, I know some people would hate this statement so much, but I could agree more.
Yeah, well, they shouldn't hate it. It's true. My colleague at Berkeley, Cameron Anderson, has done a bunch of public peer-reviewed studies published in very good journals that demonstrate that confidence is often confused with competence. That if you act confidently, people will believe you're competent, even, by the way, when they have data to suggest that you're not.
Oh, wow. So could we just following political leaders, CEOs, not because you're competent, just because they're confident?
Yes.
Oh God, that's awful, no?
No, it's not awful. It's wonderful. I mean, the wonderful thing about the rules of power is that anybody can master them and anybody can take advantage of them. It's like saying, isn't it too bad that the sun rises in the east? No, the sun rises in the east. It's a reality. Deal with it.
There we go to rule number 2, break the rules. Can you share a story about someone who broke conventional rules and succeeded spectacularly because of it?
Again, Donald Trump would be a perfect example. I think he broke almost every rule in politics. He ran for office without having any prior elective experience. He ran a campaign that defied conventional wisdom. I think, Martin Luther King broke the rules, actually broke the laws, because in those days, the laws in the United States said, blacks had to sit in the back of the bus and they could not sit at certain lunch counters, and they had to use restrooms that were segregated by race. And Martin Luther King said, I am not going to, I think these rules are unjust. I think the rules are unfair. I think the rules are wrong. And therefore, what we're going to do is engage. I mean, the whole history of the civil rights movement is to engage in forms of civil disobedience. And if you want an example outside of the United States, Nelson Mandela became the father of South Africa, sitting in jail. Why the hell was he sitting in jail? He was sitting in jail because he not only broke rules, he broke the laws at those times, the laws of apartheid. So, I think if you're going to create social change, if you're going to create organizational change, you have to do things differently. One of the aphorisms I sometimes use when I give talks to executives is everyone wants to be exceptional, but everyone wants to be exceptional by basically doing what everybody else is doing. And that, of course, is a contradiction. If you're going to be exceptional, you have to basically do things differently. And that's true whether you're a company or whether, and that's true if you're an individual.
So how can I assess when breaking a rule is worth the risk then?
Well, many people believe that breaking the rule is risky, but it often isn't very risky. People are basically conflict averse, so they won't necessarily call you on it. If you do it and don't tell people in advance you're going to do it, you will catch them by surprise. And surprise provokes interest and memorability, which are all good features. And many people believe that they are constrained in ways that they're not. My theme song for my class this year is, I'm going to have it on a slide on the very first day of class, is the song Defying Gravity from Wicked. And of course, there's a line in Defying Gravity which talks about her basically, breaking the rules. In the words of my dear friend Laura Esserman, a very famous doctor who was listed by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in 2016, and she now goes to the Time magazine conferences. Laura said to me, "Who made the damn rules in the first place? Where did they come from? Oftentimes they come out from our head, such as the rule, don't ask for help. People don't ask for enough. If you don't ask, you don't get. And so, where did the rule come that says you need to show up and act like you're self-sufficient, even though you're not?" So, I think we make a lot of this stuff up. I don't think breaking the rules is very risky at all.
And how does different cultures react to it? I mean, because here in the Middle East, breaking the rules is a big thing. I know in the States, breaking the rules and being individualistic, it's celebrated. Or no, it's the same thing.
I think it's the same thing. I mean, I've had students. I don't think I've had students from the UAE, from the Emirates, but I certainly have had students from Saudi Arabia, and they have gone back and basically put the course into practice, and I think have done quite well.
Amazing. I mean, let's jump to rule number 3, appear powerful. Let's say I have a engineer, designer, a young leader. What are 3 immediate ways someone can do to appear more powerful in a meeting or a conversation?
So I think number 1, you need to talk in a louder voice, and you need to talk more frequently. That's number 1. Number 2, it has become custom, particularly in the Silicon Valley in the U.S., to look like you're a homeless person at work. I mean, you dress very casually. You dress very, with hoodies and whatever. If you're Mark Zuckerberg, you can wear a hoodie. But many of the people, so I will take, for example, Sarah Buchner. Sarah Buchner, Buchner. If you go on LinkedIn, you will see she has founded a company called Trunk Tools. So it's artificial intelligence for the construction industry. And when she goes to a construction industry meeting, she actually went to one recently in one of the Emirates countries. She is, out of 1,000 people at the conference, she's probably one of 3 or 4 women. That's number 1. But number 2, she dresses, even in class. She always came to class dressed well. If you want to look like you're powerful, you should look like you're powerful. You should dress up, even if that's not the convention. Then you'll stand out even more. So I think you want to dress well. I think you want to speak more. I think you want to speak in a louder voice, and I think you want to take up space. One of the rules of Amy Cuddy's presence is you want to take up space. When you go into a room, sit at a meeting, you want to take up space at the desk or the table. You want to take up physical space by being taller, women wear heels. Bob Crandall, when he ran American Airlines, was actually short. So every time he gave a talk, he made sure he stood on a platform, so he looked taller than he was. I mean, you want to show up in a powerful way.
And how can one balance projecting power with being authentic and true to himself?
Oh, God. I suggest if anybody thinks they need to be true to themselves, they need to read the famous Adam Grant's New York Times column entitled, "Unless You're Oprah, Be Yourself is Terrible Advice." And I think that's exactly right. You ought to read the column. It's a great column. It talks about how authenticity is not only overrated, but it's probably impossible. No one wants to see your authentic self. They want to see, you need to be authentic not to yourself. You need to be authentic to what the people around you want and need from you. So if you're a leader, if you're a startup founder, if you're a leader and you don't know necessarily all the answers, if you come in and say to your team, by the way, we've had a setback, which all startups face, and I'm not sure what to do. The employees will leave, the investors will leave, the customers will leave. No one wants to know that you don't know what the hell you're doing, even if you don't. That's a quote, by the way, from Andy Grove. Andy Grove, the late co-founder of Intel, at a talk given for a Harvard group in the Silicon Valley, basically said, almost word for word, and this is a quote I use in my power books, he says, sometimes you have to act like you know what you're doing, even if you don't. So I think you don't want to, so people around you want to know, want you to project confidence. They want you to project the idea that the company and you are going to be successful. And so even if you don't feel it, you have to act it. That's why I tell people you need to take acting class.
Acting class?
Acting class, absolutely. You need to learn how to act. Great leaders are great actors.
Let me ask you this. Are great leaders emotional?
No, great leaders are strategic. They are able to manage their emotions. They will project emotions, but they will do so strategically. So I tell people to project anger, but not to get angry. I will tell people to be able to project the emotions that they need to project at that moment and that the people around them need from them.
What do you mean? That's very interesting. What do you mean project anger, but don't be angry?
That's exactly what I mean. I mean, you can project an emotion without necessarily feeling it. Anger inhibits your ability to think clearly and strategically. So if I make you, they've done studies that if I make you angry, you'll make more errors in adding up columns of numbers. So, anger is an emotion that interferes with your cognitive processing. You want to be able to always be able to process the situation as objectively as possible.
So let me ask you about new rule number 4, which is build a powerful brand. What's a common mistake people make when building their personal brand?
They don't. The biggest mistake people make is they don't think they need to brand themselves. They don't see themselves as a product. But of course they are. Years ago, Tom Peters, co-author of the famous first business best-selling book, In Search of Excellence, had a thing in the magazine Fast Company talking about the brand of you. And talking about how in a world in which people are increasingly moving across organizations and increasingly having, a career that spans maybe multiple functions and multiple whatever, that the one thing that is constant is their brand. And so you need a brand. You need to stand for something. You need to have an identity. You need to be memorable. No one has ever been hired by somebody who didn't remember them. Because by definition, if I don't remember Mahmoud, I can't possibly hire Mahmoud because he's not on my radar screen. So you need to build a brand. You need to be memorable.
Jeffrey, most of my audience are introverts. How can they build a brand?
So this is not about changing your personality. I wrote a case on a guy named Tristan Walker, who's an African American, an interesting guy. I talk about him, I think, in the book. Tristan Walker, I think the title of the case is, Tristan Walker, the extroverted introvert. This is not about your personality. This is about a set of behaviors. When I was writing that case, I interviewed the founder of Open Table, the restaurant app. And he said to me, if you're a leader of a company and you need to have an all hands meeting, This isn't about what you're comfortable doing. This isn't about what you'd like to do. If you're having an all hands meeting, you have to stand up in front of the company and you have to project power. You have to show up. You have to have the meeting. It doesn't matter. This is part of your job. As a leader, you have to show up in a certain way. And if you don't feel comfortable in showing up in that way, you better not take the role because you're not going to have it very long. If you do not fulfill the expectations that people have for you, you will not keep your job. I can't believe that you find this, to me, this is all common sense. It's also, by the way, based by an enormous amount of social science, but it's also common sense. And in order to be a leader, you have to have followers, and nobody's going to follow you if you look like you're afraid to be in your role. If you look like you're uncertain about what they and you should be doing. It's common sense to me.
Do you have any example of someone who was able to create a personal brand and later using it as a platform to make himself more powerful?
Sure. I mean, Tristan Walker would be one example, but there are in fact many. I think Laura Chow, who's an Asian American person in the venture capital business, has done a very good job of building the brand of Laura Chow. I think Robin Lumsden, Lumsden, you can look him up, has done a very good job, and he's an Austrian. He's done a fabulous job of building the brand of Robin Lumsden and his law firm and the other things that he does. In Africa, there's a guy named Benjamin Fernandez, who is going to come to my class this year, who's building a startup payments company called Nala, N-A-L-A. And Benji Fernandez has done a great job of being very visible and building visibility, not just for Benji Fernandez, but for the company, for Nala. And again, if I'm going to go into a competitive space like fintech and payments, nobody's going to use an app that they don't know about. So your job as a startup founder is to build a brand. Your job as a division leader in your organization is to make sure that people know about what you and your team are accomplishing, because otherwise you'll just fade away and be part of the background, and no one will know what you've done. So you have to tell your story. You cannot. Other people will tell your story, but only if you begin by telling it yourself. No one's going to tell a story that you haven't created.
Now let me ask you about rule number 5, network relentlessly. And this is one of my favorite rules because I used to hate networking. But what's one practical tip for someone who struggles with networking?
Well, I think you need to think about networking as what it is, which is an act of generosity. So, it is generous if you connect people who could benefit from knowing each other to each other. I think when you go into a relationship, any kind of relationship, you need to think about not only what do I want out of this, but how can I be helpful? What can I tell you that you don't already know? What reading material can I suggest to you? What movies can I suggest to you? What restaurants can I suggest to you? How can I be helpful to you? And so if you approach it from a place of generosity, you'll be much more successful and effective. And also you'll feel it less kind of icky. But if management or leadership is getting things done through other people, it strikes me as completely common sense that the more people you know, the more you'll be able to get done. If you need to get things done through other people, you obviously need to have connections to those other people. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get anything done.
Now let me ask you this. Is it better to have a wide network or a few deep connections?
It's better to have a wide network. I mean, the research by my colleague, Ron Burt, who used to be at the University of Chicago, I think he's now teaching at Bocconi University in Italy, if my memory serves. But in any event, what he has shown is that weak ties are much more useful than strong ties, because the people to whom you are closely connected probably know the same things and the same people that you do. So the weak ties provide you non-redundant information and contacts. And of course, it is the non-redundant information, the information and contacts that don't already overlap with what you already have and know, that are the most useful. So, if I tell you, if you and I work together and you and I basically know the same thing, to quote my friend Bob Sutton, if two people agree all the time, one of them is redundant. If two people know precisely the same people and the same things, one of them is redundant because, they, so I need to meet and find people and contacts that expand my range and my reach, expand who I know and expand what I know. And that comes from weak ties.
You know a lot of powerful leaders, people who took your class and graduated. Just curious, how can you keep in contact with them?
I don't do as good a job as I should. I do not take my own advice. By the way, however, I also am not as powerful as I should or could be. If you want to see an academic who's done a much better job than I, look at my very good friend, and he is a good friend. I've known him for 40 years, Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, who's in the news all the time. He's done a much better job.
Why do you think he has done such a great job at that?
Because he's built this Chief Executive Leadership Institute. He started that when he went to Emory. He's kept it up now that he's gone to Yale, and he has regular meetings and keeps in touch with people. So, he's, I think, done a very good job with that. He has networked relentlessly.
He does, absolutely. Now, let me jump to rule number 6, which is rules, to be honest with you, I'm still struggling with it, which is use your power. Why it's so important to use your power once you have it?
Because you need to get stuff done. And in order to get stuff done, you have to actually do something. And that means using your power. So, I think, you see executives come in. Jim Collins has a version of this, though it's much nicer. Jim Collins says, in Good to Great, he says you need to get the right people on the bus. I think that's exactly right. But unless you've got an infinitely sized bus, if you're going to get the right people on the bus, you got to get the wrong people off. And so you need to come into an organization and look around and say, do I have a team that is going to be able to do what needs to get done? So if I said to you, Mahmoud, we are going to make you a coach of a soccer team or a football team or any kind of sports team, the first thing you would do is look at the players and say, do I have players who are mentally and physically up to winning this game? And if not, the most important role in professional football in the United States is the role of the general manager, the person who assembles the roster. If I have a bad roster, I cannot win the game. I don't care how good I am as a coach. So the first thing, I think Jim Collins is exactly right. You have to have the right team if you're going to be effective and successful. And putting together the right team means you have to be pretty relentless in figuring out who's aligned with your vision, who isn't, who has got the skills and competencies required to do what needs to get done, and who doesn't. And you need to, act accordingly.
What are some ethical ways to wield power effectively?
I think everything we've talked about is ethical. I don't think it's unethical to network. I don't think it's unethical to put together a team that is able to do the job that you're trying to do. I don't think it's unethical to act or speak with power. I certainly don't think it's unethical to get out of your own way. So this is not, I'm not telling you, to be unethical. I'm telling you what you need to do in order to be effective and successful. And it's not unethical to, build your brand. Everybody's doing it. If you don't, you're at a disadvantage.
Not all of my audience are in a leadership position. How can someone exert power even if they aren't in a formal leadership role?
Well, they need to think of themselves as a leader, even if they're not. So, I have former students. So let's go back to my friend Tristan Walker. Tristan Walker at Stanford MBA. He wanted to work at a company that I think no longer exists, or it's no longer very important, called Foursquare. So he sent off emails to Foursquare because he wanted to be in the internet technology industry. He never got an answer. So he acted like Foursquare, like many technology companies, had nobody doing biz dev. So he went out and did deals on behalf of Foursquare. And he would present the deals to Foursquare. And when I wrote the case on him, the CEO, the founding CEO of Foursquare said, you know, this guy comes, he brings me a deal with Starbucks. He says, maybe I should hire him. You know, so basically, don't wait for somebody to give you permission to do the job you want to do. Go ahead and do it. By the way, this does not include being, you know, trying to fly a plane if you don't know how to fly, or doing surgery if you're not a doctor. But within limits, you know, within obvious limits, you should be doing the job that you want to do. So I see people all the time in organizations. The phrase that I would use is called taking initiative. So, you know, I have a friend who went to a technology company run by Barry Diller, and she put together, you know, a seminar series that brought her a lot of visibility. I saw a guy at McKinsey in the Seattle office put together, they wanted to do more public sector work, so he put together a speaker series of public sector people. You know, so I mean, it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. So don't wait for somebody to ask you to do what you want to do. Just start doing it.
And do the 7 rules of power hold true across different cultures or organizational context?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the reason for that is, I think, extraordinarily simple. Human psychology is the same regardless of the color of your skin or where you live. You know, we are all hardwired from our genetics and ancestry to want to succeed. We're all hardwired, you know, to basically distinguish friend from foe, insider from outsider, who's going to win, who isn't. You know, Don Quixote is a fabulous figure in literature, but if I say to you, Mahmoud, you're engaged in a quixotic quest, that is not a compliment. So, you know, we want to be associated with success. This is instinctive across cultures. It manifests itself differently. So if I'm going to go to the Middle East, I'm probably not going to dress the same way I would dress in a Western context. If I'm going to go to Japan, I may, first of all, I'm going to speak a different language, Japanese. But, you know, you obviously have to modify the manifestations of the 7 rules for the specific cultural context. But the rules hold everywhere. And the proof of that is that these books have been translated into multiple languages. 7 Rules of Power just was released, or just signed a deal, I think it actually was just released in Arabic. So, you know, here we are. Somebody must think it's useful in the Middle East.
And it's very popular here in Saudi and UAE specifically.
Well, good.
You address how women and minorities face unique challenges with power. What's the most practical advice you'd give them?
They need to, so during the COVID epidemic, I was taken out to lunch by a bunch of white boys from Stanford in the MBA program, and they were not all in my class. And I still remember the lunch. And, you know, I said, some of you aren't in my class. And they said, look, we're going to succeed anyway. You know, you come from a privileged background. You come from, you know, the right genes, you know, your parents were wealthy, whatever. You come from privilege. You're good looking, you're handsome, whatever. You're going to succeed regardless. It's, in fact, women and minorities who need the 7 rules and to follow the 7 rules more than anybody else. You know, if you're the son of, or the child of Elon Musk, your future is assured. If you're not, maybe you need to do something to assure your future. So I think these rules are more important for the underrepresented minorities and women.
If someone had to start with just one rule from your book, which one should they focus on and why?
The first rule. Because if you don't get, as we said earlier, if you don't get out of your own way, nobody else is going to help you. You know, I still remember being put on the board of a company called Unicrew, which is a human capital software company. And in the company was the CFO, Chris Marsh, who would ask to be promoted to COO. And one day I called the guy who put me on the board, Bob, and I said to Bob, Chris Marsh is gunning for your job. And Bob said to me, I'm not going to play politics. And I remember the board call in which the board, minus Chris Marsh and Bob, discussed the future of the company and what was going to go on. And a very senior executive from Intel said to me, if Bob is not going to advocate and fight for himself, I am not going to fight for him. And I think that's right. I mean, if you're not going to stand up for yourself, there will be some circumstances in which others will stand up on your behalf, but not many. What is the saying? This is not from the Quran. It's from probably either the Old or the New Testament. God helps those who help themselves. I think other people are not going to help you if you do not think you deserve help. If you are suffering from imposter syndrome, I think others are not going to help you if you don't act as if you deserve that help. And so I think rule one is by far the most important rule. And by the way, if you're having trouble getting out of your own way, send me an email, pfeff@stanford.edu. I work with executive coaches, both in the online and on-campus version of this class, and I will send you a list of the coaches. So I think executive coaches can be extraordinarily helpful to people in mastering power and particularly getting comfortable with it.
Oh, I will absolutely include this in the show notes. That's a great opportunity. Now I'm looking for a daily practice, something that our listeners they do daily. What's one habit or mindset shift listeners can adopt immediately to become more powerful?
So on Monday morning, I will have a visitor in my class named Tadia James. And Tadia is an African-American woman who has started her own financial consulting firm. And after a while working for other people, she said, I'm making them money. I need to make me money. So she started her own firm. And Tadia will say, oftentimes she goes into meetings and she will be in meetings. She's the only woman. She's the only African-American. So by definition, she's the only African-American woman. So in any event, so my friend Tadia, when she goes into a meeting, sometimes will go into a restroom and look in the mirror and basically psych herself up. Say, okay, Tadia, you've got it. It's fine, or sing a song. There's some song that she will sing to herself. That's, a song that basically makes her feel powerful. So do whatever it takes for you to show up feeling confident and powerful. Maybe it's drinking coffee. Maybe it's, having a message to yourself. I have actors. I know actors sometimes before they go on stage will do things, they meditate or get themselves psyched up or whatever, have a saying, whatever makes you feel good and brings you and the word would be centers you, that get you kind of centered in life. So you feel, so if I said to you, Mahmoud, you're going to go and play soccer, one of the things that you would do is do exercises to improve your balance. And the analogy I think is perfect. You want to do exercises that improve your mental balance, just as you would do exercises and little stretches and whatever to improve your physical balance. It's the same thing.
What do you hope readers and listeners take away from the 7 Rules of Power?
That it's possible for anybody to do this. That you don't have to be Elon Musk or Donald Trump or Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos. That this is a set of practices that anyone can adopt and use. And they'll improve your effectiveness. They'll improve your ability to get things done, which is one of the interesting things. I tell companies all the time, companies are reluctant to train people in power. I said, the big issue inside of organizations is oftentimes not strategy, but implementation. You need more people inside the company who are able to make things happen. And this is a way of basically getting things done.
Through my interview, you've been an excellent communicator. Your answers are very clear, concise. You've been very economical with your words. You use small words. Even I, as a non-native speaker, can understand. How did you how did you train yourself? As you do it consciously, is there a communication between? Is there a link between good communication and powerful leaders?
Practice, practice, just practice. I've done this for a long time. I mean, I've been teaching the class at Stanford for 45 years. That's a long time. If you don't get better after 45 years, you need to do something else.
And what about your writing? Do you think that your writing really clarifies your thinking because you've written so many amazing books?
I'm writing another one now. But in any event, yes, I think, my friend Keith Ferrazzi, who wrote Never Eat Alone and Who's Got Your Back, as a marketing, networking, communications consultant, he said, writing helps you organize your thoughts. I think that's exactly right. He said, all my life I made lists of what I want to do. And he said, I try to write stuff. I think writing presentations, anything you do that forces you to take your ideas and impose some discipline on them, I think is always helpful. And, that we teach a class at Stanford, I don't teach it, called Interpersonal Dynamics, in which students are expected to journal, basically keep notes about their experiences. So I think writing and capturing your thoughts is a great thing to do.
Jeffrey, thank you so much for your time. I know you've covered a little bit, but where our audience can reach you out to know more about power, where we have few companies that would love to hire someone like you or from your organization to speak about power here in the Middle East. How can we be of any help to you?
So, I think first of all, I have a podcast called Pfeffer on Power, and the episodes are relatively short, 20 to 25 minutes, and they cover many of the people featured in the book. So I would say you listen to the Pfeffer on Power podcast. I post on LinkedIn. I have a website, jeffreypfeffer.com, and I would be happy to come. I've come to Saudi 3 times, but I've actually never talked about power, I think, there. But I would be, I'm available to go anywhere. So I would be, delighted to see parts of the Middle East I haven't seen before, or for that matter, parts that I have.